Everyone, welcome back to another episode of Presley Mania. This is just a very impromptu, off the cuff show. Um, but I received a couple of things this week or in last week that I wanted to show you guys because I'm so excited about them and proud of them. First of all, I want to say thank you to Will Forster. Um, he sent this to me and I wanted to share with you guys how beautiful. Look at this. Isn't this just absolutely gorgeous? I'm so proud of it. Well, thank you so much. And I have not got it hung up yet, but it will be going in the office here where I do my shows on this wall over here so everybody can see it and enjoy it along with me. That was just so very sweet and thoughtful, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I will cherish it forever. Um, the other thing I wanted to show you guys is we went to dinner with some friends last night, and she pulls out this little sack that she had brought in, and she said, I have something for you. She said, I was going through my mom and dad's things. Her parents passed away a few years ago, and so I was going through their file cabinet, and she said, and I ran across a folder, and in it was this. And she said, I thought that I would give it to you. She said, you probably already have it. Here's the back of it. I said, no, I don't have it. From best I can tell, it was done in 1977 is when this came out, as best I can tell. If y'all have more information on it, please let me know. I haven't done any research on it yet, but I just thought it was cool and I wanted to show you guys. And I was just kind of looking through it this morning, and I ran across something that I thought might be fun to share with y'all on the show, and it's called Elvis's Last Interview by a lady by the name of Eunice Field. I know nothing about this lady. I've never heard about this so-called last interview. Some of you probably have. But I thought it would be fun to just go through and read a few segments about it. Something that came out in 1977 about Elvis. I mean, that's going back many, many years. And maybe we can just talk about it in the comments below and y'all can tell me what you think. But like I said, I have scanned it briefly. I've kind of gone through and shown where I want to start and where I want to stop. And like I said, this is totally off the cuff, impromptu. So I'm just going to start reading a little bit, and if I have to stop and start and stammer a little bit, I hope you guys will just bear with me. And let's enjoy some of this story together that she says. There's some really cool things she says about Elvis. Okay, let me take a sip of water and we're going to get started. By Eunice Field, Elvis's Last Interview. In the beginning, they said he was vulgar with unspeakable sensuality. They dismissed him as a passing fad who couldn't possibly last. Later, when not only teenagers but aware adults realized that he was the first white performer who had dared give them music that hit them where they lived, touching their deepest emotions, the critics still wouldn't accept him. Smart aleck writers referred to him as a joke, making fun of his purple Lincoln, his sideburns, and his swivel hips. Soon he'll fade away, they insisted. Well, I don't know about y'all, but if you've been to Graceland, you've seen that purple car. And I'm telling you, that thing is beautiful. Shame on them for making fun of it because, in my opinion, I'm surprised everybody didn't want one. That was just so super cool. Because of this attitude by newspaper and magazine writers some 21 years ago, I did the first Elvis Presley interview in Hollywood and was, I understand, the last reporter to talk to him face to face before his death. So she's saying she was the first and the last interviewer that talked to Elvis. How cool. It was in the summer of 1956. I was in San Francisco on a press junket. Because he had recently made his first national TV appearance, the name of Presley came up. Only a couple of other magazines had written about Elvis, and it was all unfavorable. National reviewers had blasted him. Personally, I had enjoyed his television shot and felt Ed Sullivan should have let the camera show Elvis's footwork rather than focusing on him waist up. After all, if he did it in public before teenagers, it couldn't be all that bad. So I came to his defense. Had any of them I demanded ever met Elvis? How did they know he was brash, crass, and oversexed? Well, I had. As it happened, he had arrived in Hollywood only 2 days earlier to make Love Me Tender, his very first film. I'd been over at 20th Century Fox interviewing Jane Mansfield when someone introduced me to Elvis. Aww. He seemed likable, polite, and in a way, shy. I told this to my table mates, among them the editor of TV Radio Mirror. Early the next morning, I had a call and was given my first fan magazine assignment. The subject? Elvis Presley on the Upbeat. It was the beginning of many stories I did on him. Elvis to me never changed. From the very first meeting, he called me ma'am or Mrs. Field. Never by my first name. Even though I wasn't much older, I never suggested that he do otherwise. It was not an affectation on his part. Elvis was brought up that way. In Hollywood, a place where all too often an actor in a TV series finds himself in a star status that his head can't handle. Elvis was refreshing. Oh, I love that. Fade out to 20 years later. I am on my way out of a strip hotel in Las Vegas. Suddenly, I discover my sister is no longer by my side. I look around just as I hear a click. The noise was a clerk locking the door of the jewelry shop. Here we go. Inside is Terry, looking at earrings. I rap on the glass, point at her, and demand to be let in. I head straight ahead to check on a ring I have long admired. Suddenly, I see a man's tanned hand holding a beautiful gold and diamond ring. Being naturally nosy, I turned to have a better look. Then I was shrieking. Elvis Presley! What are you doing here? I was so startled to see him that the words came out almost as an accusation. I knew he had no plans to appear in Vegas and was supposedly at home in Memphis. Fortunately, Elvis has a sense of humor and a good memory. Flanked by two very muscular members of his entourage, it was obvious he was well protected against any unwanted intrusions. But he recognized me, even though I hadn't interviewed him in 7 years, for the simple reason that he had appeared only at a few press conferences since his marriage to Priscilla Beaulieu, cutting off at that time any questions about his private life. Elvis really wasn't expecting to give me an interview during his surprise encounter, but I had to find out if he had changed. During the 10 years when I'd seen him often and written dozens of stories, Elvis had never hedged and had always been open in his conversations. My sister Terry, a Presley fan, from his days entertaining in the South long before his record Heartbreak Hotel brought him to national fame, had entered the jewelry shop because she'd seen Elvis there. So would I. Now she came over to meet him. I explained to him that it was she who had first told me that his swiveling style had been borrowed from gospel singers and that she had been indignant at the press and not understanding that when he first burst onto the record charts, meaning why they had just slammed him so bad. Elvis took Terry's hand warmly, broke into a grin, and said, "I thank you, ma'am. But you know, some of the writers are still saying mean things." It was obvious from his tone that he bore no grudge and that he still has his sense of humor about himself, a trait that had always shown itself on stage and off. Elvis explained that he had come into town to see B.B. King, who was appearing at the Hilton. As we stood there making small talk, I couldn't help but notice how much weight Elvis had gained. He was aware of my thought and laughingly said, "I don't get much chance for football anymore." He was referring to his movie-making days when all his spare time Lunches and during breaks was spent outside the sets playing ball. Okay, I'm going to skip down to another little bit. And it says, my sister told Elvis that she'd seen him 3 times at the Hilton. I'm glad, he said softly in the southern drawl that never left him. I was at my best then. There was a touch of sadness in his voice. It was obvious Elvis wasn't altogether happy with himself. He was always his own severest critic. I asked when he'd be appearing in Vegas again soon. Maybe one more time, he answered softly, or he answered slowly. You're surely not going to retire again, I said. No, ma'am, not altogether. I tried that once and almost went stir crazy, but I've still got that craving to see the world. To see the world. That was something Elvis told me in our very first interview he hoped to do someday. I'd gone on the Love Me Tender set to do my first fan magazine story. It was Elvis's first day before the movie cameras. Surprisingly, neither of us was nervous. Or maybe we were both so nervous we relaxed each other. Elvis had ridden his horse over to where I was standing, and he mimicked me puffing a cigarette. Even though it was long before the Surgeon General's office had issued cancer warnings, Elvis had chided, that could kill you someday. At that time, Elvis neither smoked nor drank, 2 habits he wasn't to take up until years later. Let's see. Let's skip down to another part of this because this article is really long and I don't want to take too much time on reading all of this. Let's go down to this part. She said she remembered discussing marriage with Elvis back in 1964. And this is what Elvis said. My idea of a good marriage, Elvis explained, is what my father and mother had. There was something wonderful and complete between them. I can remember to this day how warm and secure it made me feel to just listen to them talk to each other. We had our hard times, you know, but they never really got me down. When my father and mother looked at each other, I had to feel everything would come out fine. That's how great their love was. If when I'm married, my children get from my wife and me that kind of wonderful sense of being in on happiness, I'll thank God for my good luck. But Elvis was not to have that good luck. Even though he'd waited until he was sure he had found the right girl after romances with many starlets, including Natalie Wood, Juliet Prowse, and Anne Margaret, it hadn't worked out. I'll have to be man enough to keep my wife contented, and she'll have to be woman enough to do as much for me, was the way he summed up hopes for marriage. She goes on to say this. She says, why is it that those who give the most in life often receive the least in return? Here was a young man who had revolutionized the music and fashion worlds. He made sideburns and flashy clothes acceptable for men. And when the history of this age's pop music is written, first place will belong to Elvis Presley, who not only brought rock and roll, but influenced a generation of musicians in the process. Beatle John Lennon once said, if there hadn't been a Presley, there would never have been any Beatles. And Paul McCartney had added, every time I felt low, I just put on an Elvis and I'd feel great. Wow. Okay, let's see. We're going to skip some more and we're going to go on. Maybe because I had always felt Elvis looked better with light hair, or perhaps just to be obstinate at the press conference after his first show, I had asked him, this was in Vegas she's referring to, why do you insist on continuing to dye your hair? For some reason, the question created a sensation. One young foreign correspondent snarled at me, don't you dye your hair? Elvis rose to the occasion. Instead of getting angry, he laughed and said, personally, ma'am, I think we both look better with dye jobs. It was my turn to laugh. I had been a brunette the first 10 years I knew Elvis, then I'd gone back to blonde. Probably because the press conference had been so dull up until then, the exchange made the wire services. When I bumped into Elvis for what was to be the last time I was ever to see him, his parting shot was, "I see we're still both making the hairdressers happy." While his publicist had been upset about my unfair press conference question, obviously Elvis had thought it was a good joke. Aw. From that impressive opening back in 1969 until his 15th appearance last December 12, 1976, Elvis has been the main star at the Las Vegas Hilton. When word came about his death, the entire town was stunned. He had never done a performance to anything but a packed showroom. Fans made reservations months in advance. He was also a favorite with the workers. He was one of the few performers who would always speak to the employees. If he met them in the hallway on the way to his room, he would be the first to speak. Many stars don't even grunt at the common folk. Security Sergeant Mike Albrecht, who spent at the Hilton for 5 years, recalls, "He was one heck of a guy. He'd always remember you by name. He'd grab a handful of dinner rolls and play touch football with the guards as we escorted him to his suite from the showroom. Sometimes he carried a Bible and would quote passages by heart." Francesca Fegget with the Hilton, since it opened, reminisces. "He liked to fun around. He'd chase us upstairs to where we put on our uniforms. We'd tell him, 'Not tonight, Elvis.' He'd laugh and say, 'Okay, I'll wait.' But he didn't feel good the last 2 years, you could tell. He didn't clown around. He'll really be missed, though." At his last appearance at the Hilton, Elvis's left leg and right shoulder, which had always twitched in unison, seemed somehow out of sync. I jokingly made the comment to my escort, "Ah, Elvis, you're getting older." An elderly woman at the table overheard me. "It'll never happen," she said. "Not ever." Of course, she had no idea that her words would be a prophecy of time rather than spirit. But when the word came to me of Elvis's death, I recalled something he had said to me after his mother died. I don't know why she had to go so young, but it made me think about death. I don't feel I'll live a long life. That's why I've got to get what I can from every day. Elvis's favorite song was "There's No Tomorrow." I don't know how she knows that, but okay. But there will be for him. He was the biggest personality of our time, spanning the 50s to the present. No one could ever touch him. He was bigger than Crosby, Sinatra, and the Beatles. The history of this age's popular music will place Elvis in the #1 spot. Elvis was the master, greater than a king. He was and will remain a legend of our time. On the day Elvis Presley died, a scorched Las Vegas had for months been praying for rain. Because of the near drought, water was served in restaurants only on request. At the moment news came over the radio of the death of Elvis, rain began to fall. There wasn't thunder, there was no lightning, but there was heavy, constant rain for hours, drenching the parched earth. It was as though the heavens were crying for a beautiful legend who had made so many others happy, but never found contentment for himself. That's all I have for today, y'all. Let me know what you think. Like I said, this was impromptu and off the cuff. I hope you enjoyed this little segment of Presley Mania and hearing an excerpt from someone who claims to have written the last interview Elvis Presley ever gave. A very, happened to run into him kind of interview. So let me know what y'all think about it in the comments down below. I hope y'all have a wonderful day. And remember, you only get one shot at this life. Live each day to the fullest because you never know what tomorrow's going to bring. Bye, everyone. See you next time.